going to read Enrique's Journey by Sonia Nazario. Open your books to the prologue. It is Friday morning, 8 a.m. A key turns in the front door lock of my Los Angeles home. Maria del Carmen Ferez, who cleans my house every other week, opens the door. She walks into the kitchen. This early in the morning, I am usually in a frenzy to get out the door and rush to my office at the Los Angeles Times newspaper. But on days when Carmen arrives, I shift gears. I loiter in the kitchen with her, and we talk. On this morning in 1997, Carmen and I lean on opposite sides of the kitchen island. There is a question, she says, that she has been itching to ask. Mrs. Sonia, are you ever going to have a baby? I'm not sure, I tell her. Carmen has a young son she sometimes brings to watch television while she works. Does she want more children, I ask? Carmen, always laughing and chatty, is suddenly silent. She stares awkwardly down at the kitchen counter. Then, quietly, she tells me about 4 other children I never knew existed. These children, 2 sons and 2 daughters, are far away. Carmen says, in Guatemala. She left them there when she set out for the United States to work. She has been separated from them for 12 years. Her youngest daughter, Carmen says, was just a year old when she left. She has experienced her oldest boy, Minor, grow up by hearing his voice deepen with age. As Carmen unfolds the story, she begins to sob. 12 years? I react with disbelief. What drove her to travel 2,000 miles away from her children, not knowing when or if she would ever see them again? Carmen dries her tears and explains. Her husband left her and the children for another woman. As hard as she worked, she still couldn't earn enough to feed 4 children on her own. They would ask me for food and I didn't have it. Many nights, they went to bed without dinner. She tried to quiet their hunger pains as she lulled them to sleep. Sleep face down so your stomach won't growl so much, Carmen would say, gently coaxing them to turn over. Carmen, concerned that I might disapprove of her choice, tells me that many immigrant women in Los Angeles from Central America or Mexico are just like her. Single mothers who left behind children in their home countries. I start to understand the depths of desperation women face in countries such as hers. In Honduras, for example, most earn $40 to $120 a month working in a factory, cleaning houses, or providing childcare. A hut with no bathroom or kitchen rents for nearly $30 a month. Mothers must send their children to school in threadbare uniforms and are often unable to afford pencils or paper or buy a decent lunch. A Tegucigalpa elementary school principal told me that many of his students were so malnourished they didn't have the stamina to stand up to sing the national anthem. Many Honduran mothers pull their children out of school when they are as young as 8. They have them babysit younger siblings while they work, or sell tortillas on a street corner. Carmen left for the United States out of love. She hoped she could make more money here and send it back home to provide her children with an escape from the grinding poverty she herself grew up with. She wanted to give them a chance to attend school past the 6th grade. She proudly tells me about the clothes, money, and photos she sends them. She also acknowledges the brutal trade-offs she has had to make. She feels the distance between herself and her children when they speak on the telephone. As the days go by, she misses important milestones in their lives. Her absence leaves deep wounds. When her oldest daughter gets her first period, she is frightened. She doesn't understand what is happening to her body. Why? The girl asked Carmen. Were you not here to explain? Her children's friends in Guatemala envy the money and presents Carmen sends. You have it all. Good clothes, good tennis shoes, they say. Her son Minor answers, I'd trade it all for my mother. I never had someone to spoil me, to say, do this, don't do that, have you eaten? You can never get the love of a mother from someone else. Among Latinos, family is all important. For women, motherhood is valued far above all else. I was struck by the choice mothers face when they leave their children. How do they make such an impossible decision? What would I do if I were in their shoes? Would I come to the United States, make much more money, and ensure that my children back home could eat and study past the 3rd grade? Or would I stay with my children, even though they would then grow up in miserable poverty? Left behind. A smuggler could sneak Carmen's children over the borders from Central America into Mexico, and then from Mexico into the United States. But Carmen hasn't been able to save enough to pay the smugglers. Besides, she is afraid to put her children through the dangerous, illegal journey. Carmen was robbed by her smuggler when she trekked north in 1985. She went without food for 3 days. She knows it could have been worse. Her daughters, she fears, could get raped along the way. In 1998, the year after Carmen tells me about her family, her son Minor sets off alone to the United States to find his mother. He doesn't tell Carmen he is coming. He hitchhikes through Guatemala and Mexico, begging for food along the way. He was 10 years old when she left. He shows up on her doorstep in Los Angeles 13 years later. He has missed his mother intensely. He had to know. Did she leave Guatemala because she never truly loved him? How else could he explain why she left? Minor tells me about his perilous journey hitchhiking. He was robbed and threatened. Still, he says, he was lucky. Each year, thousands of children going to find their mothers in the United States travel in a much more dangerous way. The children make the journey riding on top of Mexico's freight trains. They call it el tren de la muerte, the train of death. As he speaks, I am amazed by the dangerous journey these children make to try to be with their mothers. What kind of desperation, I wonder, pushes children as young as 7 years old to set out alone through such a hostile landscape with nothing but their wits? Immigration into the United States. The United States has experienced the largest wave of immigration in its history. Since 1990, more than 11 million immigrants arrived illegally. Since 2000, 1 million additional immigrants annually, on average, have arrived legally or become legal residents. This wave of immigration differs in one respect, at least, from those of the past. Before, when a parent came to the United States, usually it was the father. The children were left behind with their mothers. But in recent decades, more divorces and separations in Latin America have left many single mothers with no income from the children's fathers and struggling on what they make to raise and feed their kids. In large numbers, these single mothers decide to leave their children with grandparents, relatives, or neighbors to work in the United States, and send home whatever money they can to help their children have a better life. As Carmen assured me, her experience is incredibly common. In Los Angeles, a University of Southern California study showed 82% of live-in nannies and 1 in 4 house cleaners are mothers who still have at least one child in their home country. In much of the United States, legitimate concerns about immigration and anti-immigrant measures have had a severe side effect. Immigrants have been dehumanized and demonized. Perhaps, I thought, if I provided an in-depth look at one immigrant, his strengths, his courage, his flaws, his humanity might help shed light on what too often has been a black and white discussion. I thought I understood the immigrant experience. My father, Mahfoud, was born in Argentina after his Christian family fled religious persecution in Syria. My mother, Clara, born in Poland, immigrated to Argentina as a young girl to flee poverty and the persecution of Jews. Many of her Polish relatives were gassed during World War II. My family immigrated to the United States in 1960. They wanted to leave Argentina, a country controlled by the military, where expression was limited. Through my parents' experience, I understood the desire for opportunity, for freedom. I also understood what it is like to struggle without money. Growing up as a child of Argentine immigrants in 1960s and 70s Kansas, I often felt like an outsider, straddling 2 countries, 2 worlds. On many levels, I relate to the experiences of immigrants and Latinos in the country. Still, my parents arrived in the United States on an airplane, not on top of a freight train. My family was never separated during the process of immigrating to the United States. Until my journey with migrant children, I had no true understanding of what people are willing to do to get here to have that same opportunity and freedom. Journalism. As a journalist, I love to get inside the action, watch it unfold, take people inside worlds they might never otherwise see. From speaking with Carmen's son Minor, I knew I wanted to smell, taste, hear, and feel what this dangerous trek to the United States is like for children. In order to give a vivid account of the experiences these children went through, I knew I would have to take their journey. I would have to ride through Mexico on top of freight trains. From Minor, I began to understand just how dangerous this journey was for young migrants. They travel alone, cold, hungry, and helpless, with little or no money. Thousands make their way through Mexico, clinging to the sides and tops of freight trains. They are chased and hunted like animals. Gangsters control the train tops, bandits rule the tracks, and the Mexican people who patrol the train stations rape and rob. Most migrant children are attacked at some point, sometimes several times along the way. Some are killed. Because they are crossing Mexico unlawfully, they can't climb on top of the trains at the station. They have to jump on and off the cars as they are moving, risking the loss of an arm or a leg. To volunteer myself to go through all this was just shy of nutty. In short, I was afraid. Before I took the journey, I needed to learn everything I could about it. What's the exact route migrants take? What are the best and worst things that can happen at each step of the way? The places where migrants face the greatest cruelty and the greatest kindness. Where are the places along the tracks where the gangs rob, where the bandits kill people? Where do Mexican immigration authorities stop the train? Might I be the only woman on the train? The scary truth is that female migrants, especially young girls, are likely to be sexually assaulted along the way, even if they have the advantage of traveling with a smuggler. Because of this, mostly men make the journey on the trains. My original plan was to follow one boy from the beginning of his journey in Central America to the end when he reached his mother in the United States. But I realized this plan wasn't realistic. I can't run as fast as a teenager. I wouldn't be able to keep up, to stick with a boy I was writing about. I'd have to be safe. I would find a teenager who had already made the journey from Central America to northern Mexico and follow him from the border to his mother in the United States. Then I would reconstruct the part of his journey before he made it to the United States, both from his stories and by going back and taking the same journey through Mexico that he had. I am not a brave person. I avoid danger if possible. I tried to figure out ways to protect myself on the journey and made one rule: no getting onto or off of moving trains. A rule I broke only once. A colleague from the Los Angeles Times had connections to people in power within the Mexican government. He helped me get a letter from the personal assistant to Mexico's president. The letter asked any Mexican authorities and police I encountered to cooperate with my reporting. Showing a letter from the government helped me get permission to ride atop the trains of the length of Mexico. This letter also helped me out of jail 3 times when I was caught by authorities. The letter also convinced a migrant rights group in Mexico called Grupo Beta to be a bodyguard of sorts for me. Armed agents of Grupo Beta would accompany me on the trains through the Mexican state of Chiapas, the most dangerous part of the journey. I arranged for the train conductors to know when I was on board. I would tell them to be on the lookout for my signal. I'd wear a red rain jacket strapped around my waist and wave it if I was in dire danger. Finding Enrique. The border between Mexico and the United States is guarded by U.S. Border Patrol. These guards aim to catch people sneaking across the border, arrest them, and send them back to the country when they came from. The Border Patrol has calculated that the average child caught coming home alone over the U.S.-Mexico border is a 15-year-old boy. I wanted to find a boy around the average age who was coming to be with his mother and had traveled on the trains. In May 2000, I scoped out a dozen shelters and churches along the Mexican side of the border that help migrants, including minors. I found Enrique through a nun at a church in Nuevo Laredo, the Parroquia de San Jose. Enrique had come from Honduras in search of his mother. He was 17, a little older than the average unaccompanied child caught entering the United States by immigration authorities. But his story was just as harrowing as those I had heard from other children and teens who had taken the journey. I needed to find a boy who had a shot at reaching his mother in the United States. In Nuevo Laredo, I spoke with dozens of other children other than Enrique, but all of them had been robbed of their mother's telephone numbers along the way. They hadn't thought to memorize the numbers, and cell phones, not widely used in 2000, weren't available to them. Many of them lived in small towns where telephones of any kind were a luxury. Without a contact phone number for their mothers, their chances of continuing their journey were slim. Enrique, too, had been robbed of his mother's number, but he remembered one telephone number in Honduras he could call to try to recover it. I decided to stick with Enrique. I spent 2 weeks with him as he camped by the Rio Grande, the river separating the United States and Mexico. He shared with me every possible detail about his life and his trip north. I noted every place he had gone, every experience, every person he recalled who had helped or harmed him along the way. I wanted to see and experience the same things he had so I could write about them and let people know what he and children like him go through. I began to retrace his steps, making the journey as he had made it a few weeks before. I began in Honduras, interviewing his family, seeing his hangouts. I took buses through Central America, just as Enrique had done. I took the same path along the rails, traveling up the length of Mexico, on top of 7 freight trains. I got off where he did, in San Luis Potosí, then hitchhiked on a truck from the same spot in the northern city of Matehuala, where Enrique had hitched a ride to the U.S. border. To follow Enrique's journey, I traveled more than 1,600 miles, half of that on top of 7 freight trains. I found people who had helped Enrique and saw towns and places he had passed through. I showed people a photograph of Enrique to make sure we were talking about the same boy. On the trains were other migrant children going to find their mothers. I interviewed dozens of migrants, as well as experts throughout Honduras and Mexico, medical workers, priests, nuns, police officers. All of this helped corroborate Enrique's story. I returned to Enrique to compare what we had witnessed on our journeys. I wanted to make sure I was creating a true account. All in all, I spent more than 6 months traveling in Honduras, Mexico, and the United States. In 2003, to conduct additional research, I retraced the entire journey again, beginning in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Since then, I have continued my research with the family and others. Following a dangerous path. During the months I traveled in Enrique's footsteps, I lived with the near constant danger of being beaten, robbed, or raped. Once, as I rode on top of a fuel car on a rainy night with lightning, a tree branch hit me squarely in the face. It sent me sprawling backward, almost off the train. I later learned a child had been swiped off the car right behind me by the same branch that hit me. His friends didn't know whether he survived the vortex of the air that drags falling bodies into the churning wheels. Things weren't much safer by the side of the rails. As I walked along a river in Ixtepec, Oaxaca, I passed through a spot busy with trains and pedestrians under the main bridge crossing the river. It seemed like a safe place to be. The next day, I interviewed a 15-year-old girl who had been raped by 2 gangsters in the same spot I thought was safe. When I came back to the United States, I had a nightmare every night. Someone was running after me on top of the train, trying to rape me. I had to do 6 months of psychological therapy to be able to sleep well again. On the trains, I was filthy, unable to go to the bathroom for long stretches, excruciatingly hot or cold, pelted by rain or hail for hours. Although I often felt exhausted and miserable, I knew I was experiencing only a sliver of what migrant children go through. At the end of a long train ride, I would pull out my credit card, go to a motel, shower, eat, and sleep. These children typically spend several months making their way north. They navigate by word of mouth or the arc of the sun. In between train rides, they sleep in trees or by the tracks. They drink from puddles. They beg for food. The journey gave me a glimmer of how hard this is for them. With each step north, I became even more awed by the gritty determination these children have to get here. They are willing to endure misery and danger for months on end. All they have is their faith and a deep desire to be at their mother's sides. They resolve not to return home, to press on no matter the obstacles. No number of police and guards will deter children like Enrique, who go through so much to reach the United States. Enrique's mother left him when he was 5 years old. Years later, as a teenager, he set out for the United States on his own to search for her. In 2000, the year Enrique left to find his mother, he was one of an estimated 48,000 other children and teenagers who left Central America and Mexico to come to the United States, illegally and without either parent. The journey is hard for those coming from Mexico, but harder for Central Americans like Enrique. They must make an illegal and dangerous trek not only across the U.S.-Mexico border, but also across the border into Mexico itself. Immigration lawyers say only half of them get help from smugglers. The rest travel alone. Since Enrique set off, the number of children entering the United States alone and unlawfully from Mexico and Central America has surged to an estimated 100,000 per year. The U.S. government has 53 shelters in 12 states to detain immigrant children, and in 2012 scrambled to open several new shelters. Some are as young as 7, though typically the children are in their teens. Many go north seeking work. Others flee abusive families. But most of the Central Americans go north to reunite with a parent. They travel with pictures of themselves in their mother's arms. Some children say they need to find out whether their mothers still love them. They see finding their mothers as the answer to every problem. Train top lessons. Enrique and the migrants I spent time with gave me a priceless gift. They reminded me of the value of what I have. They taught me that people are willing to die in their quest to obtain what I often take for granted. The single mothers who come to this country and the children who follow them are changing the face of immigration to the United States. They become our neighbors, children in our schools, workers in our homes. As they become a greater part of the fabric of the United States, their troubles and triumphs will be part of this country's future. My hope is that for Americans overall, this book sheds some light on this part of our society. For Latina mothers coming to the United States, my hope is that they will understand the full consequences of leaving their children behind and make better informed decisions. In the end, these separations almost always end badly. Every woman I interviewed in the United States who had left children behind had been sure the separation would be brief. Immigrants who come to the United States are by nature optimists. They leave everything they know and love in hopes for a better life. The reality, however, is that it takes years and years until the children and mothers are together again. By the time that happens, if it happens, the children are usually very angry with their mothers. They feel abandoned. Their mothers are stunned by this judgment. They believe their children should show gratitude, not anger. After all, the mothers sacrificed being with their children, worked like dogs, all to help provide their children with a better life and future. Reunited, they end up in conflicted homes. In many ways, these separations are devastating Latino families. People are losing what they value most: family and the love of their children. Children who set out on this journey usually don't make it all the way there. They end up back in Central America, defeated. This, a Los Angeles woman who helps immigrants told me, is the adventure story of the 21st century. Enrique was determined to be with his mother again. Would he make it? Though his story might read like a novel, it is all true.